So for the second weekend in a row, Tottenham come from behind to snatch a point. So let's get straight into Tottenham 1, Wolverhampton Wanderers 1. So two changes from the last outing in the league at Brighton. The two changes, Xavi Simons coming in for Wilson Odobert and Jed Spence coming in for Pedro Porro. Um, it was just a game where we never really got going, and I think quite a large part of that was having Bentancur and Palhinha on the pitch at the same time against the sort of opposition like Wolves. I can understand having Paulinho on there because he's a bit more defensive minded of the two. But I just think Frank got that a little bit wrong against Wolves. I think we were under no assumption that Wolves were going to come out and play and that they'd offer as much threat to warrant both Bentancur and Paulinho. If it was up to me, I would have personally gone for maybe Bergval and then Simmons through the middle with maybe Odegaard on the left, but that's the team he picked. And yeah, just really not a great game at all. Even in the ground, there was just an overwhelming feeling like it was going to be one of those days, even at 0-0. You obviously had Mohamed Kudus had his goal disallowed where actually it was quite far offside, to be fair. Um, Now we've seen the replays and that fantastic save by Sam Johnston, a really, really good stop. And I think that was sort of a turning point in the game because if that goes in, Tottenham going 1-0 up at half time. And I think then Wolves have to come out and it's a lot easier for Spurs to hit them on the counter. But it didn't happen. A really, really good save by Johnston. Personally, I think Kudus, you've got to be scoring from that sort of distance. You obviously did have Richarlison coming in, attacking the same ball, which is probably what put him off a little bit. But yeah, just in terms of the first half, really, really not good at all. There was obviously those two moments, and other than Matt Doherty hitting the bar, there wasn't actually too much really to report. It was just a really sloppy game. I think Xavi Simons really didn't have a good game. And then the first half in particular, when he's on that left hand side, um, he just really struggled. But for the Kudus chance, that was Simmons, who I think the leash is a bit longer with Simmons in terms of how much um, how much leeway you give him because I think he'd proven it in other leagues that that quality is there, and I think it will come through at Spurs. It's just maybe some teething problems at the minute, but really good ball to put Kudus in, and yeah, almost 1-0. And it was very, very much like the Bournemouth game. I think the only difference really was that Wolves had less quality on the break and weren't able to open us up as much as Bournemouth did. But it was really poor. And one thing I noticed in the first half, which was a big, big sort of factor in the game, which it didn't really change until Simmons went through the middle, was we almost have like a bank of four and then Bentancur and Paulinho. And then there's a good 20, 30 yards where there's just unoccupied space. And then the front three are stood there quite far apart. And I think that's why we never really created anything of note. And Richarlison struggled a lot. And I think how how far away our midfield and our attack was probably didn't help. We've seen it in games like PSG when Richarlison had someone up there with him like Kudus, who's maybe playing a bit more centrally that he can hold the ball up, but he just really, really struggled. And I think the thing with Richarlison is his best attribute is probably the one you want for a striker in that he's a goal scorer. But a lot like Brennan Johnson, he doesn't necessarily create a lot for himself. He sort of needs the chances, like all good strikers do. But in games where he's not getting chances, he really, really is struggling. And I wonder if maybe because since he's come into Spurs, he's never really been the first option. He's obviously been like an understudy to Kane and then to Son at points. And I wonder if maybe he's just getting used to playing regular first team football, which is ridiculous to say after 3.5 years. But generally, I think that's maybe why, because some days he looks, fantastic, and then some days he really, really struggles. Um, in terms of the changes, didn't disagree with any of them really. I thought Jed Spence wasn't having a good game, so when he came off for Porro, um, wasn't too disappointed with that. Odegaard and Johnson also come on, as well as who else come on? It was Tell and Papsar. Brennan Johnson, he's such a divisive figure because he's almost got that killer instinct in front of goal that not a lot of our team have at the minute. But if you're looking at all round play, I don't think he's contributing enough at the minute. And I think Thomas Frank's probably looking at that left wing spot at the minute and doesn't really trust any of the options there. Um, I think long term Simmons is going to be through the middle, so I don't think that'll be a problem. But when it comes to Johnson, Tell, Odegaard, none of them have got that left wing spot nailed down, and I don't think he really trusts any of them. Kudus obviously went to the left when Johnson come on, but it was just a really disappointing performance from Johnson. And look, he wasn't the only one. There was pretty much all of them, um, bar a few, were really, really below par. Um, but with Johnson, a lot of the time when we were rushing to get an equaliser, he wasn't showing for the ball. He was always pointing to someone else to for who else to pass the ball to. And I wonder if that's a bit of a confidence thing because we've seen against Doncaster in midweek, he was quite happy taking his man on. He'd done it a few times and had one of his better games in a Spurs shirt. But I wonder, I wonder if Thomas Frank really does trust any of them in that left wing option because I think out of the three, Odegaard would be my preference at the minute. Um, but it always feels again a bit with Johnson. It feels like you're expecting a bit more because he's this sort of exciting, fast, good dribbler. You're expecting more from him in terms of taking men on and that sort of thing, and it doesn't really. We've not really seen it, if I'm honest, in a Spurs shirt. We've seen glimpses of it, but not enough on a consistent basis for me. In terms of the other subs, the last two subs, Sarr and Metis Tel, really influential for the equaliser. And I don't know if maybe it's because the clock was ticking down, but I feel like we did play a lot better with um, once Matisse Tell come on and Sarr replaced Bergval, who obviously didn't have a great game. But there was a few times, and I think we've seen it against Bournemouth as well, where if Tell is to be on that left wing position, really can whip in like a really, really difficult ball for the defenders. And we've seen that for the equaliser when he whipped it in, and then Sarr with a lovely little guided touchdown for Palhinha. And yeah, we scraped the point and we really, really did not deserve it. And one thing that's got to be high on Thomas Frank's list is to get, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, White Hart Lane, for it to become a fortress again. I've seen a stat that we've only won three of the last 17. And for a team that's in the Champions League, that is, look, you can argue about how we got to the Champions League and whether we're really a Champions League quality team, but that really needs to improve. And very worrying that I don't think it's, I don't think there's a problem with Frank. I think it's just something to note is our attacking play and how that develops over time because it does need refinement. And I think Wolves sort of done what Bournemouth did really. You know, they marked off front three out of the game and then they knew that the midfield wasn't, it didn't have enough guile in it to break them down. And obviously, on this point, we did with Wolves with an equaliser, which come probably 10 minutes too late. Because I think if that was maybe the 80th minute or even the 85th, I think we'd go on to win that game. But it never really come. And it's only really the only bit of quality in the game. The Wolves goal, again, for me, Vicario can do better for that. Um, Quite disappointed with that one, but I've not played in goal. Maybe I'm judging it wrong, but he's in the past few games, he's had a couple shaky moments, and I don't think that it's a conversation to drop him for Kinski at this point. But it just feels like this is the first sort of pothole that Thomas Frank's faced um, on the pitch in terms of since he took over as Tottenham, but as Tottenham manager. But I feel like he's got the quality to get through. And look, it might maybe take a month, it might maybe take 2 months, it might take even longer than that, or it might even come quicker. We don't know. Um, but looking at that game, you do think that was the sort of game where you'd need someone like a Kulusevski and Madison dragging you through up the pitch, through the middle of the pitch, really looking to always show for the ball because I felt like no one really wanted the ball in that game, if I'm honest, until we, got that equaliser. But what can you do? What can you do? And then on to Bodo Glimt tomorrow. And until then, up Spurs.